In this video, we will look at converting from 5 of the most popular older or existing video formats, each of which came from a different source and encoded in a different format. We're going to convert these 5 files into H.264 files that we can play natively on almost any device. This in itself should help reduce the file size of these files somewhat, but we're also going to see if we can reduce the file size further while retaining the playback quality to a level we are happy with. As part of this exercise, we will be converting the files to use the more efficient H.265 encoding and then looking at what further optimizations might be possible with that. In order to read the different file formats and convert them, we're going to use a free open source application called Handbrake, which is supported on Mac OS, Windows and the Linux operating system. Let's navigate to the Handbrake download page, the link to which I will include in the description. We will be running on a 64-bit Windows system today, so we will select that option to download. Open up the file when downloaded and click to kick off the installation. Click Yes to allow the installer to copy the application onto your hard drive. Click Next when the installer setup banner appears. When the software license agreement appears, click Next to accept it. On the Choose Install Location screen, update the path as required and click Install to kick off the installation. The install is very fast and no reboots are required before launching. Click Finish to complete the installation. When we launch Handbrake for the first time, we get an error message that the latest version of the Microsoft.NET framework needs to be installed. Click to install this now. On the .NET download page, we want to select a download under the Run Desktop Apps category, and for this video we will be selecting the 64-bit download. When the installer screen for the Windows Desktop Runtime appears, click the Install button. Click Yes to allow the installer to update your hard drive. Click Close when the install completes. Again, no reboot is required. When we attempt to launch Handbrake again, it should now launch correctly. Okay, before we get going, we're going to take a look at the 5 files we're going to be converting. The first is an MOV file, which was recorded on a camcorder at a soccer match. Second file is an AVI file, which is a music video. It was recorded on an old media player from a TV. The next one again was recorded from live TV, again on a more recent media player, but in MKV format, which is not native to Windows. The next file is an MPG file, an MPEG-2 file actually. This is a music video recorded on quite an old media player, more than 10 years old. And then we'll take a look at the last file, which is a WMV file, a Windows media file. And that's actually converted from a PowerPoint file. And you can see that it's a very small file size, even though it's 6 minutes long, it's only just under 20 meg. So we're going to fire up Handbrake. So in Handbrake you've got the option to convert an individual file or to do a folder of files, which would be effectively a batch job. We've got 5 files here. You could have 100 files, whatever it is in that batch. So we're going to navigate now to our original files that we were just looking at. So Handbrake is scanning each of those files now to get an idea of each of those files, what they look like, what sort of formats, etc. they're in. And it gives you a preview of the first of the files. This was the MOV file that we had, and it's got a source preview in the window there for us. So a few things, it's got this default preset, which is fast 1080p 30, and you can see all of the other presets that are here. In general, I kind of go with the preset and then I just make any other adjustments I need to make. Can select some of these other options, like the surround sound options, for example, which will give you better quality on the sound if you want to do that, or if you want to get better encode, you've got the very fast options. So there's a number of options there, but I think that this one is pretty good starting point. We're looking for mp4 is the actual file format, so that's selected, and you can see that the default codec there is a H.264, which is what we want. So we'll go to the video tab and you can see H.264 is up at the top there, and that's the default and that's what we want for this one. So we're going to use that first time out. The frame rate we want to do is we want to set it the same as the source file, and that will give you the best quality encode. So we've got different frame rates across all of those 5 files. So when we do the encoding, each of the files that we encode to, mp4 files, will actually have a different frame rate based on what the original sources were. There's nothing else really on this pane that we're going to change right now. You can see the quality setting up there, you can see the constant and variable frame rate. I'm good to go with all of these. I think in general you can keep these the same. I think the default settings that they give you are pretty good, and we're not really going to tweak anything else here. So the other things we want to do is set the folder for the output files. So we go into the preferences, the Handbrake preferences, and there's an output files option there. And we're just going to browse to the folder, and you can see there we've got our H.264 folder. That's where we want to store any of the output files that have been converted. And then we also want to set the file extension, and there's a setting for that here. It defaults to M4V, and we want it to default to MP4, and so the files will have an MP4 appended to the end of them. And the last thing we need to do here is do the save as for the original file. So this is the first file that will be converted, is the one we're just looking at, and just making sure that that goes into that folder as well. And you can change the name here if you want to. You can see the -1 has been appended by Handbrake. We're not going to change that. We do want to change the M4V to MP4, and we need to change it for the first file, and then the subsequent files will all be per the output folder settings that we had, so they'll all follow that setting, and they will also be MP4 as well. So we're pretty well good to go here. We're going to really run with the default settings for audio, for example. We're not touching the filters or subtitles or chapters or any of those elements. So we're ready to roll, I think, in terms of conversion. So we're going to add all 5 files to the queue. And all of those 5 files will now have the settings that we have here. So those settings will be common across the 5 files, or however many files we had or we were converting. They will all be using the same setting. Now, if you wanted to use different settings for each of those files, you'd have to add them to the queue individually and edit the parameters for them individually. So you could still convert them in a batch format, but you'd have to individually edit the settings for each file, and that's possible to do that. So here we have them in the queue, and you can see our 5 files. If you at this stage decided you didn't want to convert them all, you could hit the little X there for each file and delete them out of the queue. And then at the very bottom here, it shows you the options when the queue is completed, when the conversions are all completed. This tells Handbrake what to do. In this case, we're saying do nothing, which means it'll just execute to the end, and the program will stay open, and your PC will stay up. You can choose things like shut down or sleep. If you were running, say, a large batch file into the night, you might want your machine to shut down after it had completed the execution. So we're just going to hit start queue now, and this is going to start the conversion process for the first file. And you can see it's flying through it pretty quickly. It's a small file, so it's getting through it very quickly, and we're done. That's the MOV file. And now we're going into the second file that we had on the list. You can see the credentials over there. That was the AVI music video. And it seems to be going through this one very quickly, so it's very high frames per second conversion rate, so we're nearly done. Now we're going to go to the third file. This was an MKV file, and it was about 6 or 7 minutes, I think, and so this is taking a little bit longer. So you can see the frames per second there. It's still a reasonable speed, but it is taking a little bit longer, so we'll shunt through this one quickly. Okay, we're now on to the last file on the list. This is the WMV. Again, pretty well encoded already in the WMV format, so there isn't a lot to do here, and hence it runs through that very quickly. So we're all done, so we can close this down, and I think the next thing to do is take a quick look at our files, and we'll navigate our way to the H.264 folder where we've stored the output files, and you can see our 5 files here. And we'll do a comparison now between the file size of the new files versus the file size of the original files. And you can see in general we've got some nice improvements. The MKV file, the file 3 there, that hasn't improved really, and that's because there really hasn't been a lot of change. That was pretty well encoded very similarly from a codec perspective, so we're not going to get much better improvement there. The really outstanding improvement, I think, is the MPEG-2 file, which has gone from, it's down to 1/3 of its size and still at a very good quality level. WV file has got some improvement, about 25% there on that one, which is not too bad either. But overall, we have significantly improved the disk space occupied by these 5 files in doing this conversion. So that alone is a reason to want to do a conversion on some of your older files. And now these files would have been in a reasonably efficient format already, and if you were downloading files from, say, a digital camera or a drone, for example, the native H.264 and H.265 file sizes for those, the quality levels would be set to very high, and the file sizes would be very high as a result. So you'd see significantly better improvements in your file size reduction for that type of file. Okay, so now we're going to move on to the next set of files. We'll go back to our original, and this time we're going to set the codec to H.265, and we're pretty well going to keep everything else the same. So we're going to go with the same as source. It's an mp4 format. We're going to keep the quality level the same. We're not touching any of the other settings. So the only thing that's changed here is we've gone from a H.264 encoding to a H.265. We need to change the output file folder to the H.265 folder, which is where we want to store our H.265 encoded files. So we're changing that. And then we'll also just need to edit the first file location. So we'll browse to where that gets saved. Again, we want to set that to the H.265 folder. You can actually get rid of the extra one that's been appended there. That was appended because it thought it was putting it into the folder with the other files, where it's not now. It's an empty folder, so we don't need that appended. So I think we're ready to go here. We'll add all 5 files into the queue. Add all. Go in and take a look at the queue. So the queue is showing us the history as well, so you can see the 5 that have already been executed, and you can see the 5 new files that have yet to be executed. And so we'll kick off the encoding. So it started with the first file, and we can take a look at how that's doing. And again, that's going through pretty quickly because it's a very small file. And so our file now has been converted from MOV to H.265 in this case. And you can see it there with the quality setting, the default quality setting. Moved on to the second file now. This was an AVI file. It's a music video. And again, we're running through this reasonably quickly. And again, same settings because the settings were common to all 5 files in this batch run. So we're going to speed through this one. We don't need to wait for this, so we'll speed through it. I want to take a look at the relative file sizes here. So I've put this into a table to just make it a little bit easier to read. So we've got the original files on the left hand side there. We've got the 5 files, and you've got the corresponding size of the original files. Then we've got the H.264 encoded version, and we've got the revised file sizes and the percentage improvement for those. And you can see in general there's been good improvements across the board, with the exception of the MKV file. And that comes down to the fact that the encoding there was pretty well identical, so we're actually taking a little bit of overhead, and that's making it actually a negative number, small negative number, but it's more or less the same file. When we go to the H.265 encoding, the interesting thing here is that in this case the other files only improve slightly, only by a few percentage points, but our MKV file improves significantly, so we get a 34% improvement there on the file size for that. Okay, so now we're going to do a bit of experimentation with optimizing the file size. So we're going to open up a single file. We're going to go back to our original file, file 3 actually, and this is the original version of it, which will give us the best quality when we convert it. And let's just look at our settings here. We are going to go with H.265, so that's the last one we did. We're going to do same as source, because that's what we want. Let's just look at where we're going to store it. So we're going to store it in the H.265 directory. It's going to store that as a separate name, so that's fine, that's okay. So we can say okay to that. So now what we're going to change here, and this is the only thing we're changing in this particular part of the video, is we're going to increase this setting here, which is actually going to reduce the quality. So we're going up to 26 from 22, which is the default. And we'll just make sure everything else is set up okay. So it's 1080p, correct. So we're going to do a conversion on this now. So we can just do a start encode on it straight away. And so there it goes, it's going to encode it. We can take a look at the queue. So we have one item on the queue now, which is the one that we're changing. So we can we don't need to wait for this. We'll skip on to the end of the video. Look at the original file first here. So this is the original MKV file. Kind of see what that looks like from a quality perspective. And there was a good level of compression applied to this. This was on a media recorder, so this is, you know, reasonably well compressed already. So it's not going to be perfect, but still obviously very viewable in HD. Now we're going to look at the version that we did that used the RF setting of 22. So this was the default quality setting, and you can see that really it's very hard to see any difference between this and the original. The quality is definitely equivalent. And now we're going to move on and take a look at the greater reduced file. This is the one with the setting reduced to 26 from a quality perspective. So it's actually worse. It's a higher number, but the quality is actually worse. And I think you can start to see some artifacting in the images here. There's definitely some visible artifacting. It's only slight, and so I think this is still a very usable file. If you're using it on a smaller device, you're just not going to notice that artifacting. So we'll put them side by side here. So we're going to look at the original file here versus the further reduced, the RF setting of 26 files. This is the one that is half the file size. You know, the quality is very presentable, but obviously you've reduced the file size by half. So now let's take another example. Now we're not going to do the conversion of this in real time because it's a lot slower. These are bigger files. But this is a file taken from a drone, DJI Mavic, a 4K file, 3.5 gigs in size. You can see it's ungraded here. And that's on the left hand side. And on the right hand side we've got the Handbrake output. We did the default conversion on this. We kept it at 4K. But we've used the RF setting of 22, so you can kind of see the level of quality there, and it's really hard to tell the difference. We've reduced the file size significantly from 3.6 gig to 544 meg, and you really can't tell the difference between the two. Substantial reduction of file size for really no trade-off in quality, at least from a viewing perspective. Now here we've gone even further. We've put in the RF setting of 26. We've kept everything else the same. We can see that the bit rate's obviously dropped off here, and the resulting file size is again significantly lower. It's half the size again, 236 megabytes. So that's a massive reduction. It's more than a 10-time reduction from the original file size. And again, the quality is very presentable. Again, if you're looking at this on smaller devices, you won't notice the difference. So huge reduction of file size here, using Handbrake and without any major trade-off in terms of quality. So just gives you an idea of how useful this tool is. So in summary, some of the kind of features that you get from Handbrake, and they don't really do a good job of advertising these features on their website, but you get the video and audio transcoding. We didn't really look at the audio that much. We're focused on video here, but there are a lot of audio options as well. It supports resolutions up to 8K, and we've seen the 4K example here. It's got these preset templates and custom defined output configurations, so you can do essentially what you want, or you can use a preset. You've got the ability to do large batch conversions, so you can do a conversion of a whole load of files and do it overnight. You can convert from lower to higher resolutions back and forth. Obviously if you go from a lower to a higher, you're not going to see any improvement in quality, but it may suit you to do that. You can convert to the smaller file sizes, as we've seen, by adding increasing levels of compression. You've got options between using a constant bitrate or constant quality. You've got a range of image filters as well. We're not using them here, but if you did have footage that might be appropriate to do some filtering on to perhaps help improve the quality of the footage, maybe older footage in particular. You can also crop the images, so you can add borders to them, top or bottom. And you can also configure the colors of those borders, and you can also change the orientation, so you can create a mirror image or flip the image from right to left, that kind of thing, and change things like the aspect ratio of the pixels. So a huge level of configurability in terms of what you're doing, and which really makes this a go-to tool if you're involved in video, and in particular if you do need to do conversions from other formats or other sources of video, and to get them into a form that you can use for editing purposes, for example, or for viewing on your favorite device. So open source tool, well worth taking a look at. I use it as a go-to tool, to be honest, for all my kind of video conversion work. Found it really useful. So and obviously it's free. So thanks for watching today. Please leave your feedback in the comments. And please hit a like on the video if you found it of use, and we'll hopefully see you on the next one.